Awesome. Well, good morning and afternoon to, depending on where you are in the country, to all those who are tuning in. And thank you, Iman and Alexis, for sharing your wisdom and insight with us this morning. But before we get started, I'd like to give our audience a brief overview of what we're going to be talking about, as well as introduce myself and our audacious panelists. So the journey to achieving equity in this country has and continues to be a long and arduous one, as we well know. And as we work to make the world a better and more equitable place, we've begun to scrutinize what that looks like in the workforce. Studies have shown that companies who have a more diverse workforce have higher rates of improved decision-making, greater innovation, and higher engagement, as well as increased profitability. Diversity can also, improve a company's reputation and make it easier for them to attract talent. Most people spend approximately a third of their life at work, and as such, people are looking for a place where they can be heard, appreciated, and accepted. My name is Estell, and I work at Quantcast as a key account manager, as well as the co-lead for our employee resource group, Diversity and Leadership at Quantcast. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Quantcast, we're a global ad tech company and the creators of a new and innovative intelligent audience platform that empowers brands, agencies, and publishers to know and grow their audience. I'm joined today by Alexis Kerr, who was recently named the Vice President of the Mahogany brand at Hallmark Cards. Alexis brings to this conversation and her current role many years of experience in brand and business growth from her previous roles at General Motors and Delphi, and is a proven leader in multicultural brand development. Also with me today is Iman Jefferson, who is the head of external relations and internal communications at Nextdoor. Iman is a brand communication strategist who's managed consumer and corporate communications efforts for a number of well-known brands and companies, including General Motors, McDonald's, Hanes Brands, just to name a few. So let's dive in. As Black women, many Black people often feel as though they have two identities. We have our work selves and our personal selves. And to an extent, we all leave elements of our personal selves at the door for the sake of professionalism. But to what extent is that really reasonable or healthy? I think we as Black people have arguably been operating under the notion that our personal identities are not professional. And that said, the two don't necessarily have to be mutually exclusive. So as Black women navigating what are often still predominantly white spaces in corporate America, do you feel as though you've been able to maintain a level of authenticity in your personal identity? And if so, do you feel that your ability to be authentic has evolved throughout your career?
Hey, I'll start. Mimi, first of all, to the illustrious ladies on the panel, I've had the distinct pleasure of working with Iman. And so, celebratory congratulations for your new role at Nextdoor. And Mimi, just excited about the conversation that we'll have, and just want to say happy Women's Month. I think these conversations are important. And so to answer specifically your question, I think it is about personally, how do I understand what authenticity means to a person like myself within the confines of the company's culture. And so, when I think about that, I'm thinking about things like making sure I read the tea leaves. As girlfriends and friends, when we say okay, as an example, okay can mean 7 to 10 different things. It can mean, okay, I'm good. Okay, that's enough, which means stop, just as an example. So we could all say okay. And again, as an example, that could mean a ton of different things. And so when you think about corporations as large as Hallmark and Nextdoor and General Motors, and different cultures within the subcultures, within the culture, it's important to understand what does my authentic self mean within the confines of the company? And then also, am I comfortable with that? Another great example is that I am extremely direct. That was necessary for speed, expertise, and the work that I did at Cadillac and General Motors. But when I think about where I'm at Hallmark and understanding their culture, directness and curtness and being very clear, sometimes you've got to wrap that in a lot of the care that we think about as we communicate at the company. And so maybe it looks like me reframing saying, I'm about to be very transparent. And that way I am understanding the company's culture, but I'm also serving my authentic self by getting out the things that I need to discuss, so be clear about in meetings. So for me, when I think about my authentic self, it is about how does that look within the framework and culture of a company.
Yeah, Alexis, it's interesting because I think for me, bringing that sense of authenticity to work has been an evolution. I'm the daughter of boomers. And so if you think about their generation, they were told to go out, get the good job, put your head down, do the hard work, but be careful and be mindful of how much of yourself you bring into, because it may be looked upon as a potential negative. But because we're working in these spaces, we're working on behalf of brands and working in marketing communication spaces, it's important that we do bring in that sense of authenticity. And that sense of authenticity is our voice and feeling comfortable and sharing our perspectives and feeling comfortable in raising questions or pushing back in conversations, because we're trying to get buy-in and we're speaking on behalf of consumers. And so if we really are trying to be thoughtful marketers, we need to make sure that we're bringing in all perspectives. So we're really doing a good job in talking to consumer audiences. So, again, earlier on in my career, I didn't feel that comfortable in speaking up because, you're newer in the career, you're more junior. You don't want to become someone that's blackballed or anything else. But I think if you're true to who you are, you can't deny your Blackness and bring yourself into work, right? I mean, that just comes down to who we are. And I hope that people can just accept that, right? I think we know as we'll continue to have this conversation, that's not always the case, but I'm not going to lower myself, if you will, to make people feel comfortable. I'll say it like that, Mimi. Hopefully that suffices.
No, it definitely does. And, as we talk about it being an evolution, I think that, and we talk about the effect that 2020 has had on the world around us, right? I think that having these conversations has evolved even within the last year and a half.
Absolutely.
I definitely feel as though the conversations that I was having at work, 3, 4, 5 years ago are not the same conversations that I'm having today. And that wasn't that's not 3 to 4 years. That's nothing really in time. So, as we chat about being Black in corporate America, how have you ladies dealt with or managed discrimination or microaggressions throughout your career? And Iman, I think we'll start with you this time.
Yeah, it's funny because it's like, oh, we're now putting a name to these different behaviors that we've experienced, and not just in the workplace. This goes back to college and high school. Alexis and I kind of talked about this in our prep session. We're now just putting names to different behaviors. And so again, I'm now at a place where I'm more comfortable because I'm older. And, as someone that's joining marketing and communications, it's very difficult, right? When you are new to this space, you're looking to navigate, make a good impression, and then you're hearing comments around, oh, your tone, to Alexis's point, right? Like, I too am direct. I'm also respectful, right? But in the effort of trying to get things done efficiently and making sure things are very clear, someone can take that and say, oh my gosh, she's so direct. And then that can become a connotation of this person comes across as aggressive, right? These other loose terms, microaggression terms start to become up. And that's problematic. Or things to say, well, I'm surprised, how'd you get here? Again, all this is very new for organizations, this sense of really being kind of honed into diversity. A lot of companies have spoken about it, but it's now becoming front and center, and they're trying to be more actionable. And so all of us have navigated this. For me, myself, I've made a point to, again, have those conversations, but that's something I would not have done 5 years ago, right? For those people who are trying to navigate that, I would say, one, if you don't feel comfortable in doing that, that's completely fine, right? Everyone has to do it at their own level of comfortability, but also identifying other people in the organization that you can have someone to talk to and hopefully can be an advocate for you. because there's nothing worse than not, working in these spaces, not having someone to talk to, and then these labels continue to happen more and more and more. So for me, again, identifying people that can be an ally, that can see your work, that can vouch for you is really important. Or if you're comfortable having that conversation, because also people need to be put on notice, right? And it's, if it doesn't happen now, when's it going to happen? Alexis, what do you think?
I think, like you said, Iman, now is really the time, when I think about 20 years ago, when I started in the automotive industry, many things were happening, as we talked about earlier, whether it be in high school, or college, and it just was the way it was. Now we've given a name to it. We can call it out. But again, this is over 20 years later. The other thing I would say is that I have spent a lot of time just ignoring people and the microaggressions and staying focused on the work down the path that I've been on. But I have said that at this level, I need to speak up about it. And to speaking up about it is not for me. I will be fine. I have managed and worked through this. But it's for the younger people who are coming behind me, who need a voice to this, who need to know that this is what you do when you hear something that is not correct. I just had to mentor a young lady I used to work with. She was talking about one of the people that she was working with, and he was just, the first couple of conversations were like, oh my gosh, you're so pretty. And then in the conversation they had with a bigger group, he made a couple of remarks that were inappropriate. And so, I counseled her, like, you should have a discussion with HR. She said she needed to handle it. And this was a Caucasian young female, less than 5 years within her career. And so, I gave her a couple of tools and ways to have some conversation with him. And she ended up being able to manage it. She said he's ended up being one of her biggest advocates as she started the job. I think she's now in month 3. But we have to, as executive leaders, give those notes, that mentoring conversation, tell them how to pull a person aside and tell them specifically, these are the terms and the language that you use. And so I think those are the bigger things that we can control as African-American female leaders or leaders. We've got to give our younger people the tools to speak up. And then when we're in a room and we hear anything that is inappropriate, we've got to, call it out right then and there, or post-meeting, call it out, to have a discussion about it. There's a book that says after the third time you hear some injustice or something that was said to you that you may have ignored, then you specifically call it out. I will not wait till the third time, but I will make sure I spend the time to counsel, because I don't want another person coming behind me who doesn't have the resources and abilities to speak up, to feel that they're constrained. And so, as an executive leader, it is my role to really lead from the front in that servant leadership position, by making sure that the people behind me have a clear path to excellence and to really flourish and use their talents. That's what work is about, right? Leveraging your abilities and your talents to the, to the goodness of the company. It is really about that care. That's what we're coming to work for. And unfortunately, we're dealing with all of these other things as women of color, but really it's about how can you have these things pushed aside or out of the way so I can just work like my Caucasian and other counterparts.
Everything you said, I literally want you to just snap my finger on, because so much of it really is about making sure that the people coming behind us feel comfortable and understand how to navigate this. And the other thing that I would just quickly add on and say, when these things happen, it is not a reflection of you, right? It's not for you to take that on and try to, unpack this. That is their issues, their oppressive ways, their way of thinking that is a problem. And again, hopefully we're at a point right now, because this is such a big conversation, that organizations really are doing the proper training and open to having the conversations and fixing the behaviors, because it goes back to the other point of the sense of authenticity, right? So you can't be feeling comfortable coming into a space when these things happen and you start to feel stifled. You don't get the opportunities to go work on this assignment. You aren't able to present your career becomes at a standstill. So it really all goes hand in hand. And it really is for these organizations and leaders to take this seriously, because at the end, also, it helps with their larger bottom line and productivity and making sure that they have a really positive employee morale and work base.
Absolutely. And I also think too, one of the things that I'm kind of gathering as I'm listening to you is this overarching theme of improving communication within the company, right? I think that there has been this kind of, to Alexis's point, this culture where we've kind of stifled people's ability to express themselves, not just in terms of their authenticity and their identity, but just being transparent and honest about moments or interactions that make them uncomfortable, about the microaggressions, right? And so cultivating a culture within a company where you can talk to executive leadership, speak to your mentors, talk to HR, and feel comfortable doing so, not in an effort to necessarily get someone in trouble, right? But to improve the overarching culture for the company, you know, as we continue to progress and grow and build more equitable, diverse and honest and spaces. So Alexis, as someone who specifically works on a brand that is geared towards empathizing and engaging with a specific demographic, what advice would you give businesses and or people who are trying to affect change regarding diversity and inclusion within their organization?
Well, Hallmark is your brand. I mean, we are a brand that's all about, creating a more connected world through people. And that starts with really care, And so as we think about DEI, and it's not just people of color, it's people in the, LGBTQ plus community, people with different abilities, as we think about our Asian brothers and sisters and what they're going through at a time like this, companies really have to pause and really embrace their internal employees. And so a lot of the work that needs to start has to and must start internally. And so as you can imagine, when you start internally with your employees, you're starting this groundswell that is really authentic to who you are. And then you're moving out and having conversations and audits with customers, making sure you're listening to their needs and then adjusting. You're looking at the culture and listening, I would say staying focused on that and those adjustments there. And so organizations, one, should start with their internal employees, but two, really should look at what's happening in culture and figure out what are the places that they can really connect and actually assist the change. And so when we think about the social justice movement and DEI and the spaces that we're in today, it is about how can we see what's happening and be part of the positive momentum forward, not placate, not leverage, not do things that are temporary, but really be part of this positive movement forward. A great example is our new Uplifted and Empowered card collection that started internally with our internal employees, writers, poets, illustrators, saying that from our pain, we want to create a collection so that we can talk about that, so that that can be shared. And then on top of that, as a company, we said, yes, we're selling this amazing collection of cards, but in February, in honor of Black History Month, let's give away 1 million cards. And now I came on board. I'm a product of us really leaning into the gaps and the spaces that needed to be filled, as it relates to our Mahogany brand, 30 years in the making, without a lot of marketing and sales focus, but great creative. And now I'm here to push that brand into new communities, but really also serve our community of women, really serve it. And I think the brands that do that will do exceptionally well.
Absolutely. And so, as we talk about building a culture of diversity and inclusion that extends outside of the workplace, both in and outside of the workplace, right? Iman, how is Nextdoor looking to address unconscious biases, and racial profiling, in communities where it could potentially be rampant and could create an unsafe environment, particularly for people of color, considering the atrocities that we've seen in the Asian community, growing as, I think it's grown 150% since over the last year. And, you know, the atrocities that we've, you know, continued to see over the years against the Black community. So I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. You know, Nextdoor is a social platform built on neighborhoods. And what you know about neighborhoods is that you can choose your neighborhood. You can't always choose your neighbor. And so we are really a microcosm of what is happening in society. Every conversation is a social network platform, right? So every conversation is happening and these opinions are being shared. The goal of Nextdoor really is for us to create a space where people, everyone, feels embraced and welcomed, particularly those people of color, right? Because of what's happening right now is being put on our sites as it is discussed in every public forum. And so for us, it's really about creating a space where people feel welcomed and they most importantly also feel very safe, right? So again, you can exchange ideas and opinions and thoughts, but doing that way in a way that's respectful, and again, that's safe. And so from a Nextdoor perspective, you know, we've done a lot of different things to make sure that we are giving our neighbors the opportunity to, one, you know, feel and see that we're committed to this. This is something that we're discussed constantly. It is a goal for our company. And it wasn't something before what's just happening now. This is something that the company is based on, right? This is not just an action because of what's going on. But things like just making sure people join our network, that they're joining the neighborhood that they want, are signing a member pledge that kind of outlines what the policies are and what we're encouraging and how they use this, you know, the service, this tool, this platform, this hub. We also have things like our kindness reminder, again, that lets them kind of just see what kindness looks like. You can exchange thoughts and again, ideas, but doing that in a very respectful and safe way. And the other reality is, again, that, you know, what's happening now, we have to get comfortable with what's uncomfortable. And how do we have these conversations, again, where you may have a different opinion, but we don't want someone to not feel that they can share their thoughts in a respectful way. And so there's constant monitoring going on. We're making sure that, you know, our board is diverse and is reflective. That's from an external perspective, but also even from an internal perspective. Again, the purpose of ERGs and having open conversations, to Alexis's point, all those things help build a groundswell, and that we all see the mission and purpose, because at the end of the day, we really do want this to be a better kind of world, but we're also living in this world. And we know that there's so many things going on, and just having those kind of honest conversations and constantly looking at what we can do to make things better, safer, and welcoming people of color.
Absolutely. And as we talk about honest conversations and being comfortable with the uncomfortable, and I think paying more attention to the world around us, and unfortunately the ugliness around us, right? And how that has become a growing theme over the last year. The Black Lives Matter movement began with a social media hashtag after the acquittal of George Zimmerman when he shot Trayvon Martin back in 2012. And the movement really grew nationally in 2014 after the deaths of Michael Brown in Missouri and Eric Garner in New York. And, you know, kind of post-civil rights era, I'd say maybe particularly in like the 90s and early 2000s, especially after Barack Obama was elected. I think many Americans, you know, had, and some continue to have, the misguided notion that racism, which is arguably, you know, woven into the fabric of the foundation of this country, you know, and the caste system that is designed to keep, I think, people of color, but, you know, particularly Black people at the bottom, you know, was not that bad or such a long time ago. And I think the brutal murder of George Floyd, coupled with the circumstances of the pandemic, right, really highlighted the considerable inequities that plague the Black community as well as other communities of color in this country. And so when did you feel more comfortable being vocal about the Black Lives Matter movement at work and addressing some of these social and cultural issues at work, and what factored into your decision?
I think the pandemic has forced this entire country, this entire world to kind of just be still, right? There weren't as many distractions. And so while what happened with George Floyd, is something that is recent, these things have been happening for well before I was born, obviously coupled with social media. These things we're seeing more and more. But I think the accessibility of what happened in terms of it, going viral very quickly, the country being at a standstill because of the pandemic, an election year, there were just so many things happening all at once. I think it forced people to have to address this. And again, from a brand perspective, you have to talk to your employees, right? Like everyone is feeling and seeing this, and having these conversations amongst your employees is first what's important. And then also as a brand, how do you then join this conversation, right? This is a very uncomfortable conversation. Some brands haven't been a part of this conversation before. So when you wanted to make a stance, you had to also make sure that this is something that has tied back to your values and beliefs. Or if it hasn't, how do you enter that conversation very thoughtfully? Because you don't want to be someone that says all these things, and then again, a year from now, 2 years from now, that's not been reflected in your brand's values and how you guys come across when you talk to consumers. So I think, again, this year is just, 2020, not this year, 2021 is new year, but 2020, I think just so many things happened all at once. And people are looking and feeling things differently. I think our, social issues and concerns just as humans have changed and shifted because of what happened. And this is part of that conversation. So, as a Black woman, obviously I felt that. I felt it with Breonna Taylor. I felt it with Trayvon Martin. But I think what happened last year and the timing of it and just the lack of distraction forced everyone to have that conversation, because you're feeling it and because you're already at home. There's things of isolation and loneliness and working remote. Internal communications became even more important. And so making sure that they leveraged all of that and then brought that conversation in from a marketing brand perspective. If you weren't a good marketing brand communicator not having a conversation, it also would have been talked about.
And I'll just say that, first of all, we as women and people of color have since well before 2012 been having this conversation. Last year, 2020, and all of the events, the pandemic, to Iman's point, just brought it to the forefront for the rest of the world to kind of join the conversation. Right. So the movement had already been happening. People have leveraged the hashtag, for, as you mentioned, nearly a decade now. And so it was just that flashlight on what was happening and the explosiveness and visceralness of it happening, like within 2 weeks. But it wasn't that we hadn't had massive injustices happen, within 2 weeks or within the same weekend. I can think of Chicago, and, there was a number of tragic deaths over 1 weekend. And so now we're in a space where we can bring that up in a corporate environment, and corporations now have responsibility, not necessarily because the corporation has decided, but because of the world really has decided that you need to step up. Like, we're not waiting on our government. We're not waiting on legislature. We need corporations. So the world is holding corporations hand in saying, I need you to join us in these injustice conversations. I need your help, corporations, to help us with the pandemic and everything that's happened. And so now it is about, as Iman mentioned, how do corporations who have not played a place in this role, how do they begin parts of the conversation? And I dare say that you just start. You start saying, we don't know how to begin. And so because of that, we're going to work with nonprofits. We're going to, work with influencers. We're going to see that there's a need, whether it's a need around small businesses. We know early on during the pandemic, small Black businesses were nearly twice as much ended up folding or closing as it relates to those businesses versus majority businesses. And so we're going to, not just write a check, but we're going to support them. We're going to have programs. And so there are so many things that you can do before, during, and after just making a statement and standing up. You can change the composition of your board. You can, adjust your hiring practices in reference to who you're bringing in. Are you making sure you have a diverse pool of people to pick through? So there's so many things corporations can do. And then those who have started, you've got to track and have metrics around how is the success. Iman mentioned it. Are you still doing something 2 years later, 6 years later, 10 years later? And so if you think about other initiatives or pandemics like safety issues, companies put metrics around them. There's a task force. And so when you think about these injustices with people, even the ones that are happening in an LGBTQ plus arena, when you think about those issues, you've really got to take action. Diversity, inclusion, anti-racism, all of those isms take action. And companies have to find themselves on the right side of doing the work with a strategic roadmap to get there, for there to really be change within their companies, but also within the communities that are buying and they're servicing in their products. And so I was excited to come over to, Hallmark. We have a new vice president of DEI, but also she's got a 10-point plan of how we're moving forward. We're looking at all of the assets that we've made in our enormous catalog of product, and we're looking at them from a lens of cultural sensitivity. And so it is action that we're taking. That audit will be done probably before the year is over, but it's looking at every single product that we have and we've created and looking at it from a lens of, is this culturally accurate? Maybe it was 20 years ago, but is it culturally accurate now? Could it be seen as offensive? And just joining in that conversation and saying that we're going to make those changes. Those are just some of the small things that we're doing at Hallmark. But I think there's always a place for companies to play. Nike and Colin Kaepernick, 4 years ago, threw another, flag to say, hey, that this is happening. There's an injustice. And so, none of this is new to, marketers and communicators in this realm, but none of this is new really to the Black community.
And the other piece is that consumers are now really saying, and the research is backing it up, that they are supporting brands that are committed to improving social issues, right? So you have to be part of this conversation. If you really want to respond and continue to get those consumers, they're looking for that. They're expecting that now.
I would just say, to your point, Iman, a great example is we just got metrics 2 days ago on our uplifted and empowered card line that really speaks to what's happening. Are you okay? And we saw that the audience that bought them in Walgreens was much younger than the target audience that we had for our original Mahogany cards. So I dare say too, that when you get it right, you also are financially benefiting from it as well. And so that is always the conversation, what is the financial piece? It definitely pays in the dollars and cents as well when companies really do get it right.
Right, and I think there's something to be said too for saying that we haven't been a part of the conversation, right? Rather than trying to come in and give the perception that you have been or that you know what you're talking about. And I think that speaks for but brands as well as individuals taking the time to reflect, see where you haven't been a part of the movement or the conversation, educating yourself, and then taking action. And I'm taking this from Iman. I'm gonna just let everybody know I stole that from her. But I think that that's super important, and being okay with saying, I don't understand, I am not educated, and I'm going to take it upon myself to educate myself as we see what's going on in the world around us with the Meghan Markle conversations, the debacle with the royal family, and the subsequent conversations that kind of have come out of that, right? Instead of saying, kind of asserting your opinion when you are a person of privilege, right? Taking a moment and taking a step back and saying, I don't understand. I'm going to take the time to reflect, attempt to educate myself, and then maybe come to the table or the conversation with constructive questions. And I really like the point that you made, Alexis, about, is this culturally accurate, right? And thinking about the evolution of culture as brands try to connect with their consumer base. But I'm going to take a second here, and we have, I think, a little bit of time left to open the floor for Q&A. Someone had said, where do you see the biggest generational differences within DE&I? And I'll give it to you, Alexis, to answer that one.
So Iman made a great point earlier, and it was that, her parents, our parents, tended to say, keep your head down, stay focused, ignore everything, and so my generation, I definitely was told that. I have Caribbean parents. My dad is from Jamaica. My mom is from the streets of New York. An amazing woman, but she always keeps me grounded and focused. And so as I think about what happened and how I, navigated through my own personal journey during civil unrest, as well as the work that I had to do, it was great to have my parents who were part of movements earlier just pour into me. And so I think that piece is, many people may not, necessarily have that opportunity, but I did. So now my generation, I tend to stay focused on what is the job at hand, but I also am like, but I have to speak up. I have to speak up. I have no problem with speaking up. And if I think about Iman's, generation, or, what she brings, a little bit younger than her, myself, and she is going to speak up. She's probably not even going to think about it. She's going to speak up. And I think that's wonderful. And then the younger people that are, below her, that, cross-generation or blended generation, they don't know anything but speaking up and saying, I don't feel comfortable. I don't understand what you said. What did you mean by that? So they're not thinking, that's going to take me a couple of minutes to think through, position, read the tea leaves, read the room, see if that okay was okay. Maybe I'm looking for another Black person to see if, he or she has my back. And if you think about generations, that are coming behind me, they're not even thinking this is the new norm. They were born with a Black president. They were born during a time of civil unrest. And so when you think about that, it is going to be different. And for me, in my role right now, I just had a meeting last week with some of the younger generation. It was to say that you can aspire to be wherever it is you want to be, but it's not necessarily going to be easy. Just because you get a lot of no's does not mean that a yes is not going to come. But what I didn't do was try to silence them in their voice, in their existence. What I didn't do is leverage some of the tools that was used on me to help me navigate 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago, or 5 years ago. I let them be who they were. I provided some insight kind of behind the curtain to say, here's some other things to think about. You have a wonderful creative view, but think about the business side. We still are here to sell products, so think about that. So I gave them some considerations, but I also listened to and allowed them to continue to move forward in their voice. And I think, when you think about women who are in my position at my age, early 40s, it is important that we don't pour down the things that were directly told to us, but we leverage them with the culture and with our expertise and say things like, use the language, ladies, that you hear in these meetings, use them back when you're pitching ideas. But I never tell them to be silent, not be themselves. I don't tell them those type of things. And so it's about that evolution, even in my leadership, and the way that I see the world. I've got to evolve too as an emerging, leader as well. So that piece is important.
Iman, if you'd like to speak to that.
Alexis just took everything out. But I mean, I think the biggest thing I would just echo and say that, we aren't seeing people who look like us in these more senior roles. And so that's also part of the question of asking, why aren't these things happening, right? Because if you don't see people who look like you, then where do you see yourself in this organization? So I'll just leave it at that little part.
No, I think that's great. And I think it's so important that we see people who who look like us, right, within our organizations to help lead us and guide us. So and when you think about I think the generational differences, we talk about having boomer parents. I think I'm a little bit younger than Iman, but my parents are a little older. And I also have boomer parents, and I feel as though I've had a lot of those kind of experiences as well in my own life. My dad grew up in Jim Crow, Texas, right? So, his perspective on, dealing with and navigating, DE or DE and I don't know if he's navigated DE and I in the same way that we have, but just kind of navigating one's Blackness, one's identity in the workspace is very different.
It's tough too, right? I mean, I was talking to my mom about this panel last night, and we were talking about my dad, who is deceased now, but how he worked in corporate marketing and in the 80s and late 70s, and the frustration he would have with, microaggressions, blatant racism, and would come home and talk about it. And so frustrated about how that was happening. And I was like, not on my watch. Like, if I can call it out respectfully and, just provide some awareness. And again, it's not for my benefit. It's for those people who are my peers, who are coming up in the communications field, to see there is a pathway to growth and that you can use your voice and be respected as well.
Right. And thinking about how, how you said, not on my watch, right? Understanding that how it's about, not speaking up before was about maintaining job security and one's livelihood, or in certain instances, maybe outside of the workplace, maintaining, your safety, right? Not speaking up, not talking back in Jim Crow, Texas could mean your life. And thinking about how that transcends not just, being outside of the workplace, but also in the workplace, and how that shapes our interactions with people, and subsequently how we raise our children.
Absolutely.
So are there any more questions before we're kind of winding down on time here? So I want to make sure that we answer any questions from the audience.
Hey, Mimi, one thing I will offer is, as you look at myself and Iman, we came from the same company, but as we think about authenticity, she is wearing her hair in braids today. That is what works for her. I'm wearing my African print garb. And I think that is a sign too, to just say, we are trying to push and help younger people who don't feel comfortable with whatever it is that their creativity brings. And so leaders also have to exhibit, trailblazers also have to exhibit some of the qualities and authenticity, that we want to see in the young people behind us. And I think that piece is important. There are so many things that I think that happen in Black and Brown communities that are unsaid, but they, for us, are a nod to, yes, this person gets it, or their vision for us to say, yes, I too have permission to do that. Maybe wear my hair in a natural, wear it back, wear it in braids, maybe wear my African print that I wouldn't have thought of, or just whatever. And some of those things may seem so small and insignificant, but they mean the world to people. When I had that conversation last week, I didn't think anything of having a conversation with 4 to 5 African-American females at Hallmark. But to them, it was like, wow, we appreciate you just sitting us down and having a conversation. We appreciate you just listening. And so I will say, for all the people of color who are in any position, and I don't just mean senior executive, but any position, make sure you support, help, listen to, give feedback to the younger people coming behind us.
Right, absolutely. I did have a couple questions come in. So one person asked, any advice on speaking up when being the only woman of color on a small team? She went on to say, I had so many feelings and emotions and didn't feel I could have them. I smiled trying to keep up since our team didn't freely have conversations, so I didn't feel seen.
Yeah. Hi, team. This was a tough weekend for me, based on everything that just happened. And for me, I'm going to need XYZ, or I'm feeling XYZ. I think the thing is, it always feels uncomfortable. It does, even for senior execs. It is all because it's an uncomfortable conversation, to Iman's earlier point. And so if you feel better, most of the time when you have a quick conversation, maybe it's not with the entire team, but at least your leader, and then your leader can bring it up as necessary to a bigger team. And sometimes maybe your team is not who you need to have a conversation. It is that girlfriend chat, and COVID has put us on, a million group chats. And so maybe your place of discussing that may not be your workplace. For some it may, but it may not be. And so it is about finding whatever that safe space and place is for you to have that discussion, but you owe it to yourself. I have had to have it at work. I have seen other senior executives send out an email to the executive staff and or to me saying, hey, I feel this way. And so you've really got to get it out. Other than that, you can't be focused at work and contribute everything you need to contribute.
And I would just quickly add that, this is when, your manager who is acting as a leader needs to, in fact, be a leader, right? Like, this person is responsible for your development, growth, and hopefully emotional safety at work, right? So if you aren't feeling comfortable, there has to be some space that you can bring up this conversation. And hopefully you're having one-on-ones with that manager, and you have to say, and I know it's difficult, I think her name is Monet, to do that, but you will feel so much better at least expressing to that person, because that is their job, right? They are managing you. They need to understand what is going on. And so it's for you to hopefully leverage that. I mean, they should also be asking these questions. It should be a two-way dialogue. But if that's not happening, it's their responsibility to make sure that you are growing and feeling seen. So I would just make sure that you're having this conversation with the manager.
Awesome. Do we have time for one more question? If not, that's okay. Okay. So the last question was, how has COVID changed how you deal with DE&I in the workplace?
I think a lot of companies are talking about it that we're not talking about it or focused on it in the past. And so I think COVID has brought a light to that. But I also think civil unrest has played a bigger part in it versus just COVID. COVID was kind of the beginning, but civil unrest really caused companies to take action. So it's conversation and then there's true action. And so civil unrest really allowed many, or prompted many companies to really take action and have at least a leader, initiatives, and what have you.
Second. Awesome. I would just say real quickly that, again, I know we're closing out, that, this is an ongoing conversation, right? This should now become, hopefully, the DNA of your company. This is not just a trend right now because it's something that's that's top of mind, but this really should be incorporated into your strategies moving forward. And if that's not happening, you have to raise those questions, because you're missing out on an entire consumer audience if you're not interested in having these conversations.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, ladies. Thank you, ladies, so much for taking the time to chat this morning. This has been a wonderful conversation. Audience, I hope you've gathered as much as I have, because this has really been a wonderful time. Thank you for your insight and wisdom, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, guys.
I second that. Thank you all for such an incredible, informative, and crucial conversation, and all of the work you three are doing to create change in the space. I gained a lot of knowledge from that conversation, so thank you again.